Hello, and welcome to today's Chronicle. Today is Monday, March 16th, 2026.
Contesting Citizenship: The Testimonies of Undocumented Immigrant Activist Women. Growing up, I was told that my life was defined by the illegality of my body, in a place I could not call home. I, like many others, migrated with great hope. However, the reality that became my life in the United States was different than what I had hoped for. El sueño transformed into a life in the shadows, unseen and unheard. I have used my lens as an undocumented person to analyze citizenship, governance, illegality, and civic engagement through a gendered framework. I, like the women I interviewed, have faced the nation state's tactic of fear to keep us silent and under control. Tactics which have sought to keep us from owning our presence in this country and seeing ourselves as political agents capable of making change. My aim in this chapter is to highlight the ways in which, despite this anti-immigrant context, undocumented women have deconstructed their identity as illegals and developed as powerful, active members of their communities. More importantly, through their activism, undocumented women have learned to advocate for themselves, regardless of their status. As active members of their community, they have been able to establish a feeling of belonging. In this context, belonging pushes the limitations of citizenship, where undocumented women have reclaimed their space and a sense of community. My involvement in the undocumented immigrant rights movement from 2006 to 2018 gave rise to an alarming observation. The undocumented community has been fractured. During my early involvement, I recall mothers marching demanding safer lives for their children. This coincided with the rise of the Development, Relief, and Education for Alien Minors, DREAM Act movement, which focused on the struggles of undocumented youth who arrived at a young age and were pursuing higher education. These young people were seen as exceptional, both because they were raised in the United States and because they were in college. This exceptionalism allowed undocumented youth visibility within the debate and around immigrant rights in a way that was very different from their non-dreamer counterparts, who struggled to be seen. Witnessing this division was foundational for me, because despite my educational privilege, I did not identify as a dreamer. My upbringing gave me an understanding of the nuance caused by the division. I was intimately connected with the awareness of all the things that were sacrificed so that I could have more resources. I took notice that it was always stories like mine that made it to the national television networks and social media, but never stories like that of my mother's. I believe these voices, which have been excluded and sidelined, have the potential to change and unify the movement. That is why my focus in this chapter is on undocumented women who are not dreamers, but who through their activism are changing the political landscape around illegality, citizenship, and belonging. Globally, since 2010, there was an estimated 210 million people living outside of their country of origin. Issues surrounding citizenship and migration are incredibly complex due to the myriad forms of legality that are granted by nation states. Millions of border crossings happen every day around the world, an occurrence which in the United States is persistently framed as an issue of national security. However, the movement of bodies across international borders must be seen within the broader context of the production of hostile environments. For those deemed as the other, the United States serves as an example of anti-immigration enforcement reactions caused by the movement of bodies into its territory. Because migration is a phenomenon that is experienced differently by social groups, there is a need for more academic attention to and analysis of this subject from the perspective of those on the ground. Federal inaction in ending the legal violence of the immigration system has forced many undocumented immigrant women to have become political activists and agents of change. The goal of my research is to further add to the academic work that exists in the meaning of citizenship. For undocumented immigrant activist women, I ask, how does this transnational migration shape notions of belonging for undocumented immigrant activist women? How does engagement in political activism against state-based immigration enforcement lead to undocumented women to challenge notions of citizenship and illegality? I argue that undocumented women continually navigate fear in spaces that they inhabit, but that speaking out, becoming engaged, and sharing their testimonies results in personal transformation and a feeling of belonging, resulting in creation of communities of political power. My research aims to contribute to existing scholarly work on undocumented women by specifically highlighting how they embody resilience and resistance. Israeli soldiers fire on family car in occupied West Bank, killing 4. A Palestinian man carries Muhammad Bani Odeh, 5, at the funeral of 4 members of the Odeh family who were killed in their car by Israeli security forces during an army operation in Tamun, West Bank, Sunday. Ramallah, West Bank. Israeli soldiers fired on a car carrying a family in the northern West Bank, killing 4 people, including 2 children, the Palestinian Authorities' health ministry said. The official Palestinian news agency said the family was shot late Saturday after going out to buy new clothes for the coming Eid al-Fitr holiday. Israel said it was investigating the shooting. The Palestinian Red Crescent Rescue Service said that Ali and Wade Odeh and 2 of their 4 children were shot in the head. The Odeh's 2 surviving children had shrapnel wounds that were examined by first responders once they were granted access. The group said, accusing Israel of delaying ambulances dispatched to the scene. Israel's military and police said in a joint statement Sunday that forces opened fire after a car accelerated toward them in Tamun. They said the forces were pursuing suspects accused of terrorist activity and that the shooting was under investigation. The members of the Odeh family were the latest casualties in the occupied West Bank, where shootings by Israeli settlers and soldiers had previously killed at least 8 Palestinians since the start of the Iran war. Since Israel and the U.S. attacked Iran on February 28th, Israeli authorities have restricted movement across the West Bank, intermittently closing hundreds of gates and checkpoints on roads used by residents, ambulances, and commercial traffic. The barriers have tightened movement and made emergency response significantly more difficult. The Red Crescent told the Associated Press last week. Israeli rights group Yesh Din said on Wednesday that it had documented 109 incidents of settler violence in the occupied West Bank in dozens of Palestinian communities since the start of the war. The toll is lower at this point in 2025, a record year for violence, and that began with Israel invading northern West Bank cities that the military said were militant strongholds. Israeli forces still maintain presence there. The United Nations Office in the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs has recorded 18 Palestinians killed in the occupied West Bank since the start of the 2026, including 8 by Israeli settlers. We Are Not Dreamers, edited by Lazy J. Abrego. Undocumented students' access to higher education has taken many turns over the last 30 years. A series of legislative and policy fights in California stretch back to the Leticia A. case in 1985 and culminate in many ways in the passage of the California DREAM Act in 2011. These wins secured through the daring activism of undocumented young people and their allies. Have not only made possible undocumented students greater access to higher education, but also have remade the political landscape of the states as a whole. And in this remaking, there is another transformation underway that is perhaps less visible, but nonetheless deeply meaningful. As undocumented students enter and graduate from college, and in some cases even pursue an advanced degree, they have begun to speak back to the burgeoning body of literature that has grown alongside this process of the increased access. The undocumented young people who have been the objects of study are increasingly present in the places, sites, and spaces within which this knowledge is produced. Their work theorizing illegality and citizenship, education, and belonging has the potential to grow the field, shift understanding, and remake the bodies of literature that speak to their experiences. This intervention is profound, both deeply personal and intimately political. As two Latina professors in California, Salvadoreña and Chicana, we have witnessed these developments and had the honor of working with many of these students. This book emerged from our shared experiences, not only the mentoring undocumented students in the research, investigating and theorizing different aspects of undocumented life in this country, but also through a shared insight into how uniquely challenging this process can be for them. These are often students who we know not just because of their academic lives, but because we have encountered them at protests, rallies, and meetings. They are leaders who motivate others to fight for change. We listen to their political analysis and strategic vision from behind the megaphone and recognize their quiet courage in acts of civil disobedience when they make our news feeds. In their everyday lives, they refuse to be defined by the arbitrary and unjust immigration policies of the United States. Motivated by an understanding of the global forces that push them and their families out of their countries of birth and knowledge that the United States benefits from their labor and civic contributions. They are, in short, uniquely positioned during this specific historical moment to think and write about the complexities and nuances of what it means to be undocumented in this country right now. When they seek our guidance through the research process, it is clear that they envisioned this research was their chance to talk back to all of the scholarship that has been produced about their experiences. Familiar with the discourses and fields of inquiry that theorize their lives and experiences. They demand to be knowledge producers in that sphere, many not only tired of being what they describe at times as guinea pigs of academia, but are ready to intervene in these scholarly conversations. As undocumented students embark on the process of designing research projects, however, they often hit a woodblock. We have experienced a dynamic whereby undocumented students begin the writing process to capture the complexity and complication of the undocumented experience and find themselves paralyzed when they realize through their writing they must name the things they work so hard to resist, the laws they de-emphasize to be able to navigate and create paths for themselves. In higher education, stand powerfully on the page, too difficult to ignore in and through writing. They must come to face with the institutionalized legal challenges that have very real potential to derail them. They are forced to confront the fear that punctuates undocumented life, oftentimes a fear they struggle to quiet. In a 2013 interview, Abrigo conducted with a college graduate named Sam Sudium exemplifies this dynamic. I remember first being depressed at various moments, and then again in my last year in college when I was graduating and thinking about my senior research, and then just thinking about being undocumented every single day, like what should I write, what is relevant. I think I was really hard on myself as well because I felt like there weren't a lot of undocumented folks work about undocumented people, and so I felt like it had to be right. I got myself into this frame of thinking like right or wrong, or like how would I combat arguments that go against this and things like that. But that last year, thinking about being undocumented every day, which is something that is, if you're undocumented, you know you're undocumented, and it impacts all aspects of your life in one way or another. But it's also the thing you try to not think about the most, or try to have it not hinder you as much. So you kind of ignore it. But intentionally and actively thinking about it was very heavy. Just thinking about it every day was a lot. Of course, there are other barriers. The structural barriers they face may force undocumented students to spend their days working long hours or commuting long distances daily on inefficient public transportation. Some deal with the emotional weight of the consequences of immigration enforcement in their communities, or are left to pick up pieces after the deportation of a loved one. They may be unable to focus due to financial worries, or absent from school while searching for care options for ailing parents without health insurance. The structural inequalities created by immigration policies affect all aspects of their lives. In the face of poverty and legal violence, many undocumented students come to consider research and writing as luxuries that are out of their reach. Once again, Sam was able to capture these challenges as they affected the research process during the final year of college. You're thinking what's going to happen after college because being in school doesn't offer a level of security for undocumented folk. I know if I'm going to go into work, it's going to be minimum wage. I know if I'm going to be exploited on various levels. And there are things that you have to expect one way or another, or that are at least more difficult to challenge and advocate for outside of the context of school, and so there's so much uncertainty. As mentors and advisors, we work to support these students through their writing process, a navigation that inevitably involves grappling with their own legal status. Many have published brilliant research. Some, though, even with exceptional research projects, have struggled with putting their work and into their real world, deeply hindered by emotional challenges required by the process to document the complicated web of illegality, educational opportunity, the carceral state, and the deportation regime. Understanding these unique challenges, we have recruited 10 undocumented, documented, and recently formerly students in California to build this volume, and clearly demonstrates that not only is their scholarship not a luxury, but also it is incredibly important. for the continued growth of this academic field. This project grew out of a set of relationships built through the academy and the activist advocacy work on the ground. The final product is a collection of chapters by a cross-section of authors. And built the volume around the themes and their issues their research prioritized. This work is their own. Each chapter was solo authored and born of the author's scholarly engagement with the topic of illegality and undocumented status within and outside of the academy. It's important to know that some authors regularized their status during the production of this volume. Thus, while there are some variations in terms of the precise status of the contributors, each author shares the experience of living as an undocumented immigrant in the United States for many years into their young adult lives, and draws onto this experience in intimate ways to theorize citizenship, illegality, and undocumented life more broadly. This, we believe, is a profoundly important contribution. A cholesterol test you've never heard of is not recommended to prevent heart disease. Doctors say patients should get lipoprotein tests along with other screening. It is new guidelines for managing cholesterol. New guidelines for managing cholesterol call for more aggressive prevention and earlier treatment, including a recommendation that all adults be tested once for lipoprotein, a genetic risk marker for heart disease. The American Heart Association and the American College of Cardiology released the updated guidelines Friday, which aim to expand the tools doctors use to assess cardiovascular risk. Cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death for men and women in the United States. We know 80% or more of cardiovascular disease is preventable, and elevated LDL cholesterol, sometimes referred to as bad cholesterol, is a major part of that risk, wrote Dr. Roger Blumenthal, a cardiologist at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, who chaired the guideline writing committee in a statement. But knowing your LDL levels alone may not be enough, Blumenthal said. Measuring additional biomarkers, he wrote, can give a more complete picture of someone's cardiovascular risk and help inform decisions about whether lipid-lowering therapy is needed sooner rather than later. Among the new recommendations is a one-time lipoprotein test for all adults. This is a simple blood test that's widely available, and increasingly, many primary care physicians offer it as part of preventative care. Because lipoprotein is genetically determined and relatively stable over a lifetime, the test typically needs to be done only once, ideally early in adulthood. Elevated levels signal an inherited risk for heart attacks, strokes, and other cardiovascular conditions. The guidelines also call for wider use of coronary calcium scoring, which is a non-invasive scan that measures calcified plaque in the arteries. They also encourage healthcare providers to use a risk assessment tool called Prevent, which can project a patient's 10-year and 30-year risk of heart disease to help guide decisions about starting medication. Cholesterol-lowering drugs, known as statins, remain the first line of treatment for high cholesterol. Under the new framework, medications could be considered even for patients with relatively low risk if their overall lifetime risk profile supports it. There's a sea change, said Dr. Stephen Nissen, a preventative cardiologist at the Cleveland Clinic. A person's lifetime risk is what counts. These new guidelines will result in more people being treated earlier, Nissen adds. Since generic versions are available for all the major statin types, the drugs are relatively inexpensive. Nissen said he pays about $3 per month for his statin prescription. It's estimated that 25% of adults in the U.S. have high levels of low-density lipoprotein cholesterol, or LDL, which increases the risk of heart attacks and strokes. Nissen says the guidelines will affect millions of people and lead to many more being treated with statins and other medicines that can lower LDL cholesterol. He stresses that an earlier and more intensive preventative approach could lead to a significant reduction in heart attacks, strokes, and cardiovascular disease overall. The guidelines also emphasize the benefits of modifying everyday behaviors and habits, including regular physical activity, avoiding tobacco products, and healthy sleep habits. The cornerstone of good cardiac prevention is diet and exercise, says Leslie Cho, a preventive cardiologist at the Cleveland Clinic.